dawn at Lake Baringo, and our last breakfast at Soy Safari Lodge. We watched the sun rise over the lake and heard the plans for today. It would be a travel morning as we headed south to Lake Nakuru. We would leave immediately after breakfast, although we would be doing a little light birding on the way. A bird we had been looking for but without success was Hemprich's hornbill. These birds can be very difficult to find if not nesting, and no nest had been discovered, so it was a surprise when another birding group reported that a bird was flying around on the top of the Baringo cliffs. We had to go and take a look. One was there, it was very distant. A second one was hidden in a bush. Maybe nesting would be soon. Happy with the views, we headed back towards the town, picking up our first red and yellow barbets at the side of the road. The red and yellow barbets were joined by a black-throated barbet. And a lone Rhinoceros barbet. Some authorities consider this to be a different species from the Rhinoceros Uzambiro barbet we had seen back around the Masai Mara. Maybe one day they will be split officially. We were heading south, along the Rift Valley, towards Lake Nakuru. This lake is alkaline, as compared to Lake Baringo's freshwater, so it attracts different birds. In particular, it is famous for huge flocks of flamingos. The alkalinity of the water is reducing, due to the same flooding that was affecting all of the other lakes we had seen, so the flamingos were not the spectacle that they once were. Still, we were looking forwards to it. At the park entrance we were able to get out and stretch. The car park area just by the gates was actually very birdy. We found red-cheeked cordon bleu, mountain grey woodpecker, some hybrid lovebirds and our first African hoopoe. African hoopoe is one of those species that may, or may not, be a separate species to Eurasian hoopoe. We think it is separate. The easiest way to distinguish is by the lack of white patches on the feathers of the crest. Whilst in flight it lacks a white band on the primaries. The lack of white on the crest is obvious on this individual. Leaving the gate we entered a wide expanse of grassland. No sign of a lake. Not much bird life either. Just a distant single raptor sitting on a power pole. It wasn't until we got a lot closer that the identity was resolved to auger buzzard. We were heading towards a clump of trees. Distant savanna habitat promised grazing animals, and a few common savanna bird species popped up, like lilac-breasted roller, northern antechat and grey-backed fiscal. The grey-backed fiscal is a large but sociable shrike species, often seen in pairs or small groups, although here we had only one bird. Like most of the other fiscal species, the female has chestnut-coloured patches on the flanks, so it appears that this bird was a male. We entered a track leading into a lightly wooded area, finding a red-chested cuckoo that provided good, if slightly obscured views. Then we had the sighting of the whole tour. Another safari van was parked by a large tree at the side of the track. We pulled up behind them trying to see what they had found. It was a leopard, lounging in a fork of the tree, just slightly above eye level and only about 10 yards away. Wow, just wow. The other van pulled away and left us to enjoy the sight of this beauty. It seemed unbothered by our presence, just looking around at the scene. It was so close that it felt like it could take a standing leap from its perch and land on our pop-up roof. In a tour full of splendid birds and animals, somehow this was the most splendid of them all. Unsurprisingly, a large chunk of SD card memory was taken up with photos and videos of this beautiful cat. We turned away briefly to look at a bird in the trees at the opposite side of the track. When we turned back, the leopard had gone, slipping away without a sound. The bird was our first greater honey guide. Nice, but no leopard. Also at the side of the track was a female olive baboon, cuddling her baby, and a white helmet shrike which showed well only briefly. This was to be our only helmet shrike of the entire trip. Lake Nakuru is a known site for the second of the 3 types of giraffe we could see on this trip, Rothschild's giraffe. This species, or subspecies, is unusual for having 5 horns, or ossicones, on the head, 2 on the top, 1 on the forehead and 2 behind the ears. The other giraffe types have fewer. We didn't see many of these but enjoyed watching this one tackle a particularly thorny acacia bush. Another bird we hadn't seen for a while, a long-crested eagle. These birds like forest edges in moist areas, so this seemed like a perfect spot. They sit on high perches, scanning the ground for their rodent prey, before swooping down for the kill. We headed towards a sandy area of small cliffs and hollows, maybe an old quarry. Kenyan rufous sparrows were in the surrounding trees. The small cliffs were full of ledges and pockmarked with holes. There was movement on one of the ledges. We stopped to look and found a female Abyssinian wheat ear. A little brown job, to be sure, but a lifer nonetheless. We rather liked her. It got even better when the slightly more showy male popped up alongside. It's always nice to see both sexes of a species. Near here we also found our first and only striped kingfisher. It was lunchtime and we had been heading towards a picnic area, one where we would be able to dismount from the vans and explore a little. It was a large clearing, supplied with toilets, and full of very excited primary school-age children all on a school trip. We headed down to the quieter far end of the clearing. We were not sure why this bit was considered safe. It was surrounded by woodland and we knew there were leopards. Perhaps the school kids were scaring them away. There was a nice selection of birds around a couple of benches. Lesser masked weaver and white-browed robin chat all looked interested in the contents of our picnic boxes. Cinnamon-chested bee-eater watched from the trees. Here also we came across our only northern puffback of the trip. These birds get their name from loose feathers on the lower back and rump that the bird puffs out. Rather a surprise was a white-fronted bee-eater, our first and a lifer, which was found in the grass around a patch of bare sandy earth. It showed very nicely before flying up into a tree and showing even better. Also in the trees at the picnic site were our first black-faced vervet monkeys for quite a while. There were ants here too, big red ones scurrying to and fro from a large hole. And a female black cuckoo shrike posed briefly in the surrounding trees. As people finished up their picnics and packed away the debris, in came the cleanup squad. Greater blue-eared starlings were quickly on the job, joined by white-browed robinchat and lesser masked weavers. We didn't have to worry about leaving traces behind. A didrik cuckoo was found in one of the trees and caused a bit of a scramble until everyone was able to see it. The shiny green plumage of the back was very hard to pick out amongst the foliage. We set off again, heading towards the open savanna we had glimpsed just after we had entered the park. We were hoping for a special animal sighting there. First, though, we stopped for an unusually close view of white-browed kukul. Very satisfying. Oh, and a look at one of those pesky cisticula species. This one is the rattling cisticula. A couple of black-backed jackals lurked in the tall grass. Unlike earlier sightings, they did at least face towards us. We were destined not to get good photos of this species. The open savanna, and the special animals we had hoped to see here. Southern white rhinoceros. There was an adult, presumably female, and a well-grown calf, grazing a long way away. There was no track going in their direction, so this would be our best sighting. The animals were surrounded with western cattle egrets and shared the grassland with plain zebras and olive baboons. White rhinos are not white. It is thought to be a mistranslation of the Afrikaans word for wide, referring to the wide flat top lip. They are also known as square-lipped rhinoceros. At last, the lake. We had hoped to be able to get out of the vans here, but the lake waters were too high and the park warden said it was too dangerous. Never mind, the lake edges were teeming with birds. We would travel only a short distance in nearly 2 hours. There was so much to see. Pied avocets fed at the lake edge and glossy ibis waded through the grasses. Yellow-billed storks were very obvious, feeding in the shallow water or flying overhead. We had our first sightings of the splendid Cape teal here too. What was missing were the huge flocks of flamingos that Nakuru was famous for. Eventually we found some, although not huge numbers. Strangely, these were greater flamingo, supposedly the rarer of the two species here. These were not a lifer for us. We'd seen many during southern European trips. Blacksmith lapwings on the lakeshore provided good photo opportunities. Maybe the most obvious of the birds on the lake shore were great white pelicans. We watched a small flock swimming by and seemingly ducking under the water all at once like synchronized swimmers. We really don't know what these two were doing. More flamingos, and this time the other species, the lesser flamingo, our lifer. The easiest way to tell them apart in the field is the wholly dark bill of the lesser flamingos. Again, there were no huge flocks wading in the shallow waters, but there was a steady stream of birds passing overhead. Apparently Lake Bogoria, partway between Baringo and Nakuru, is now the flamingo's favorite spot. Back to more common species, and grey herons were foraging on the lake edge and common sandpipers wandered the beach. African buffalo were also down by the lake. Kittlit's plovers were a bit more exotic. We'd last seen these at Lake Nakuru. This was a spot for a good variety of shorebirds, such as little stint. And a curlew sandpiper. Common ringed plover was rarer for us than for the UK contingent, although we have seen them in Nova Scotia. It was good to add to the trip list, as was common greenshank, looking fetching posed against the wavelets. The second of the pelican species, the pink-backed pelican, was found amongst the mixed flocks. Nearby the odd ruff was feeding. Also in the mixed flocks loafing on the shingle were our first gulls of the trip, mostly grey-headed gulls, but also the odd common black-headed gull and lesser black-backed gull. We also found some gull-billed terns here. Good views of African spoonbill included this pair busily grooming each other. Of course, there were plenty of African sacred ibis in the flock too. And the odd marabou stork stood by the water, looking stately, or as stately as you can, with a face that only a mother could love. Back to the peeps, with Temminck stints showing well. And it is always a pleasure to see grey-crowned crane. It was getting fairly late in the afternoon, but we were still finding birds for the day list, if not the trip list, although Goliath heron was not for either. We'd seen one early this morning on Lake Baringo. This was a better view. It was joined in its little patch of water by Egyptian geese, African spoonbill, pied avocet, and lesser flamingo. A black-winged stilt wandered into the frame. That one was new for the trip. Back with the waders, and wood sandpiper was new for the day. As was marsh sandpiper and little egret. Blue-billed teal were also new for the day. Our last sighting had been back at Mangwa Marsh. A couple of Egyptian goose parents proudly shepherded their fluffy little goslings. Late afternoon at Lake Nakuru. It was time to turn away from the lake edge and move towards our evening's accommodation. On the way, we were delighted to find a bearded woodpecker. This one is an adult male, identified by the black forecrown, contrasting with the red crown. The female would have a wholly black crown. Tonight's accommodation was situated actually within the park, the Sarova Lion Hill Game Lodge. It was perhaps the busiest of the lodges that we visited, with a number of safari parties staying. It was also perhaps the poshest lodge we had stayed at. Not that any of them had been bad, not at all, but this one was very nice indeed. A very comfortable room, a good dinner and a good night's sleep would be the order of the night. Tomorrow we'd be moving on again, heading to Mount Kenya. For more information, see our 3-volume travelogue, in ebook or paperback, from Amazon. Why not catch up with our Australian birding adventure? Videos are available on our channel and travelogues from Amazon. If you have enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel. Don't miss the other videos in the Kenyan Birding Safari series.